LeRoy, how's it going, man?
Not too bad, John. Yourself?
Doing all right. You guys staying busy out there?
Extremely busy, extremely busy. We did our first launch, or we did the Boost launch this last month. So we're starting to roll out a lot of products, as you can imagine. It's a lot of ramp and a lot of hustle and bustle and a lot of interest. So it's all been good.
So you and I have chatted about Boost a little bit. I've seen a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about it and what are you guys experiencing with the deployment?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, or for you, as you know a little bit, FreeWire actually is a technology company that's devised EV charging solutions based on integrated battery solutions. So the Boost is a fast DC charger that basically integrates 160 kilowatt lithium ion battery cube inside of it. And what that does is it allows us actually to charge cars quickly. We can charge 2 cars simultaneously at over 60 kilowatts. We can charge one at over 120. And at the same time allows us to do some things that are valuable to C-store owners or to other retail. Specifically, we don't take up much of a footprint. We use standard infrastructure, pretty much the same thing used for level 2. But the way we charge off of a DC battery at least allows us to mitigate peak energy charges and also mitigate demand charges, which if you're trying to run a DC fast charger, as most people know, is probably one of the biggest issues when it comes to OpEx. Yeah. So anyway, so the Boost is, so the rollout's gone real well with BP, and we'll be rolling out here in Nevada, in Oklahoma, and some places east, along with obviously the things we're doing with BP in California.
So how many?
Very, very good.
So how many sites are you guys in right now?
So we've launched our first one this month. We've got another 5 going out in multiple locations along California, but also then out in just outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I think another 3 are going to go out.
Okay.
And in Nevada, 2 or 3. So we're early stages in terms of initial rollout, but we have a pretty significant ramp target for Q4.
All right. So when you're starting a company like this and you're trying to get into this business, share with me a little bit about your perspective of the EV market. Clearly, California is a hotbed, but
yeah.
You know, you hear headlines, and I'm the guy who always tries to bust headlines because they're always just completely over the top. But you clearly have a pretty good idea of where the market's heading. Can you help me walk through what your perspective is?
Well, yeah. So when we've looked at the market, I mean, we look at it in multiple dimensions, clearly. As you mentioned, New York, California, as such, you see a lot of EV adoption. But we're also starting to look forward to where you're seeing EV adoption start to grow. And also where states, counties, and governments, local governments, or the federal government is stepping in to actually provide electrification and capabilities for future demand. So if you look, it's pretty amazing what you see. You see a lot of incentives, for instance, coming out in places like Texas, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, places where maybe traditionally you wouldn't thought there was huge EV growth relative to the rest of the market. So what we try to do is not only obviously focus on where there's an immediate opportunity, which obviously would be California, New York, some places like that, but also where we see the growth is coming. And I think what they're doing is basically building, saying, how do I build out an electrification network that's going to be able to support EV growth as it tends to evolve over the next 5 to 10, 15 years. And then part of that, what happens when you do that build out? What's the impact to the electrical grid? How do you actually manage those services, things of that nature? That's the way we've looked at it and why we've probably taken a unique view at how you do EV charging, especially DC fast charging.
Yeah, so one of the things we've been talking to retailers about is, the macro picture is EVs are coming. They're growing market share. They're going to be a more significant portion of the transportation sector in the future. We can debate all day long over several beers, how fast and to what extent. It's irrelevant. They're coming, they're going to be significant. And so the opportunity to get into the charging business does not necessarily mean look at the macro trends that applies to your location. You need to look at the local dynamics to figure out when the timing is right. So you guys are kind of finding partners and picking and choosing where to deploy your charging stations, but what criteria are you looking for? What things are you looking for in a market to tell you, hey, this market, this community might be ready for a charger?
So I think, we look at a couple of different things. Obviously, we're looking at a certain level of EV adoption in certain parts of the country, but there's some other areas that we look at, such as density, i.e. where there's a lot of office buildings or where there's a lot of multi-tenant dwelling type of environments. Because as you see that growth start to evolve, One of the big problems or one of the big challenges an individual will have is if they don't have the ability to charge at home, where are they going to charge? And if they're going to charge someplace else, how cost effective is that going to be? How quickly can they do that charging? And if you look, we tend to start focusing on areas in businesses that support that environment. So we look at this as you can charge at home, you might be charging at work, or you might have to charge outside of work. And if you're charging outside of those first two environments, i.e. the home and work, then are you going to be charging, you know, at some local retail location or some local municipality or whatever? And if you choose to take a long trip, how are you going to charge? Because that's obviously the other big issue when it comes to range anxiety. So we think actually certain marketplaces and certain types of businesses suit well to maybe that third category. In addition, we service the other business environments and such, but in this particular context, when we talk about C-stores, they obviously fit into that third category very effectively, I think.
Yeah, so you're looking at the potential demand of people that are going to need non-residence charging. You're looking at EV market growth and all those dynamics to say, hey, you know, the timing's right. The timing might be 6 months, 12 months from now. And that's how you're kind of picking and choosing who you want to partner with.
Yeah. And then I think we also look at, you know, you have different perspectives from different retail entities within the market. And you have even differences in terms of opinions of, you know, from C-stores. And you see a big transition in terms of forward linking or leaning C-stores that are saying, you know, or fueling environments that are saying, hey, we need to be able to supply this capability or provide this capability to complement our current services. And we want to be ahead of that curve for any number of reasons. It could be financial, it could be location, it could be, you know, opportunity and such. So we do tend to focus a lot on those also. And that's, if you look at the partners we're working with, they tend to fall into those categories.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned it's the DC fast charger that you're deploying. So we published a paper a couple months ago about EV infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And the author of the paper kind of summarized that, hey, you know, we've built out a lot of infrastructure, but it's all L2, it's all level 2. And the future has to be DC fast. When you talk about the convenience industry or even the retail industry as a potential site host for charging equipment, is DC fast charger the way we need to go? Is there a market for L2, or do we really need to be focused on accelerating the DC fast? Because when you look at DOE's inventory of chargers, there's like 26,000 charging stations. And like 3,500 are DC fast chargers. I look at that and go, man, that's just not enough.
Yeah, I think I saw a report just published yesterday by one of the sustainability groups that basically said, you know, DC fast chargers represent marginally maybe 13% of everything that's been deployed in the United States. So probably about the same number you're talking about. You know, relative to your question, I think when it comes to C-stores, yes, I do think DC fast charging is the right approach. I do think it's had challenges in the past that maybe have limited, you know, the consideration of a site owner for deploying that technology. But the reason I believe it is the correct answer is when you look at the dynamics and the business models that drive C-stores, or at least most of them, space is a premium in one case. So how much space do I take in my parking lot? But more importantly, it's dwell time and how quickly do I turn over my parking spaces is a fundamental driver. And then obviously, what can I generate in terms of retail opportunity from that individual that's coming, you know, to that location? So the problem, or not the problem, but the characteristics of an L2 charger is you're charging fairly slowly, right? To get 100 miles worth of range, you might be sitting on that charger for an hour, depending on the car you have. That's not a valuable asset necessarily in that context for a C-store owner that would like to have somebody in a parking spot for no longer than 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour, depending on their offerings. So DC fast charging enables that in that, you know, if you have 100 plus kilowatt charger sitting on your lot, or 120 kilowatt, we can charge and put 100 miles on, say, an Audi e-tron in less than 10 to 15 minutes. I actually ran a test where I ran one and put 100 miles in less than 9 minutes on it.
Wow.
So I think that is, when you run those economics, that's valuable to a C-store owner. The challenge for them has been, though, as you know, is that space is a premium. So how do I build out and not take up a lot of footprint with a traditional 480 volt infrastructure that requires cabinets and these things? The ability to charge multiple cars off of one station is an issue, right? Most DC fast chargers will only charge one at a time, which means if you want to charge simultaneously, as a lot of the requirements in the States show out, you have to put 2 DC fast chargers in, and you take up 4 parking spaces with that. So now we're burning up space that we maybe don't get value from. And then the cost of energy. especially in locations where maybe you have high utility costs or you have high demand charge. And then I would say there's probably one of the things that I believe most C-stores and site owners in that space look at: what's the value of the asset? How can I maximize the value of this asset? You know, and I don't want to maximize it for 2 or 3 years. I want to maximize it for 5, 10, 15 years, because that's how long I own that site. So I think those are the factors that tend to drive their behavior. And some of those have been prohibitive maybe in certain cases, up until now at least.
Yeah, you know, we talk to convenience retailers all the time, and you go from one extreme, oh my goodness, my business is going to be over next week, what am I going to do, to electric vehicles are just Jetsons era, John. They're never going to happen. I'm not worried about it. But really the reality is they're here, and there's an opportunity in certain circumstances. And it really is that balance between speed of service, quality of service, dwell time. But you mentioned you got 100 miles in 9 minutes on an e-tron. I mean, is that the direction the industry is going? Are we really conceivably going to be able to deliver meaningful charge in under 10 minutes?
You know, I think so. You know, the limitation obviously is, as you know very well, has to do with, it's not the charger sometimes that dictates how much charge you get in the car. It's the car, right? So if you look at the majority of the cars that are going to be on the marketplace for the next 5 years, at least the ones that most people can afford to buy, you know, they're not going to pull 118 kilowatts off of a DC fast charger. They're going to pull 40, 50, maybe 60. So, you know, in 60, you can get a pretty reasonable charge, right? With 60 kilowatts on most cars, you can maybe put 100 miles on that thing and in a reasonable amount of time. It may not be 10 or 15, you know, 10 minutes, but it may be 20. So I think you're looking at this much like you look at a gas station in certain cases. Can I top up enough for what I need to do? And, you know, if I can sit for half an hour at a station, will I get a sufficient charge that allows me to either do my business around, you know, the day, or does it get me going on my trip and continues me going on my trip? So I think those are the dynamics. Can you do it? Yes. I mean, clearly we're doing it. I think there's you see a lot of other DC fast chargers, whether they're at 50, 100, 150. And I think then it just becomes an economics question, especially if I'm the site owner. You know, how do I maximize the value of this? And how do I not be spending more money on energy? Not to mention the fact is, how do I become a partner with the utility who's actually going to be very concerned about this space moving forward?
Right. We talk a lot about future proofing. And if you're going to be making an investment, so you're going to be cracking concrete or in conduit, or whatever you're doing to prepare your site to have a EV charging station, just because there's only a couple cars that can take the maximum charge right now, does not mean that's how it's going to stay. And I'm pretty confident in the next 5 years or so, the number of vehicles rolling out that can take 150, 200 kilowatt charge and get meaningful charge in 5 to 10 minutes is there. And I think it'd be short-sighted, in my opinion, to put out a whole bunch of L2 chargers or a whole bunch of really low kilowatt chargers that in 5 years, the majority of your customers are going to go, this doesn't give me what I need. Yep. Got to build for the future, because it's not a cheap endeavor to get into this business.
Yeah. And I mean, I think L2 chargers are great, but I don't think they're great for the type of environment we're talking about right here, right?
They're good for parking structures, airports, apartment complexes, but not the opportunity charge that we're trying to satisfy here.
No. And you know, someplace where you expect to be able to do something in 5 or 10 minutes that's meaningful, or just like I could pull into a gas station today and spend 10 or 15 minutes at a gas station and fill up my tank. You know, that's going to be the expectation moving forward. The question is how does the industry help those retailers and those people providing those services to do this cost effectively? That's where the big challenge is going to remain to be, I think, moving forward. And I think there's no question about EV adoption moving forward. I mean, look what's coming out in terms of cars, especially when you look at the trucks that are coming out. And I'm a firm believer that once you start seeing Rivians and F-150s and things of that nature that have good range, 200, 300, 400 miles worth of range on them, number one, they're going to burn up a lot of energy, you know, so they're going to be as effective as, say, a Leaf might be in terms of how it's using its energy, but they're also going to meet the needs of the consumers in a significant part of the country. And I think that's going to drive a significant change in behavior. And it's also going to drive a significant need for fast chargers in certain cases.
And I think you hit it right on, because the pace of EV adoption has been relatively slow. It's been dominated by one brand. And they're building sedans, a crossover. Yep. But they're also a unique brand. They're a lifestyle brand. They're an aspirational brand. I believe mass adoption only occurs when we start getting equivalent performance and range with a battery that we have with the most popular vehicles being sold today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the most popular vehicles are the pickup trucks and the popular crossover utility vehicles. You start electrifying those vehicles that the customer's buying time and again, we know exactly what they are without having a name and
Mm-hmm.
anybody giving anybody free marketing here. Then you can start seeing the adoption rates pick up. If the price comes down, they're price competitive, they perform admirably, and they're in the same package that the customer's always bought.
Yeah, and I think that's where the industry's going. I mean, it's clear. I'm in the same camp with you. I walk around the office saying the same thing. I think the world changes significantly when you start seeing trucks get in the marketplace.
Right.
It's what people use. It's what they need. And once you see that, and mainstream cars, which you're starting to see, not just the high-end Tesla or the high-end Lucid or something like that, but something that, you know, an average person is going to go out and buy and use. I think you're going to see whoever didn't get in front of this business is going to be chasing the business. And I don't think you want to be chasing the business. You want to be in front of it.
Yeah, 42% of light-duty vehicles sold are crossovers. 17% are pickup trucks. That's 59% of the market are crossover and pickups. You add SUVs, you're at 80%. It is a market that has to be penetrated. So I see a lot of comparisons. Well, Europe is doing it. Europe doesn't drive the same car vehicles that we drive here.
Agree.
It's a completely different market. So the capability requirements are very different. Now, another question I have, and that we're going to try to explore through our Electric Vehicle Council, is how much infrastructure is enough? And the question that came with building this new research proposal is, there's the amount of chargers that customers say I have to have access to feel comfortable buying a vehicle, and the amount of chargers customers actually are going to use.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out that balance. Have you guys found any studies or done any research say what is the optimal market penetration of chargers based upon population density?
You know, I can't say that we had anything specific yet that says exactly. I think our tact has maybe been a little bit different than just looking at population centers and looking at it in the light you're looking at it, or the question that you've asked. What we've started to do is say, what's going to be the impact to the grid, regardless of how many you put out? So our approach has been, and in part why we have the technology we've developed, is we spend a lot of time talking with the utility providers. Because if you reverse this and say, whatever that optimal number of charges is going to be, and you realize there's going to be adoption, what's going to be the next big problem, or what's going to be the next big challenge that comes down the pipeline? How do I keep the grid up and operational in a cost-effective way? So we focus a lot more on, okay, where is that going to be a problem as we start rolling out technology, and how do we help address that challenge? And clearly, you know, in urban areas and in growing areas where you're building EV chargers and deploying and expecting EV adoption, the utility grids are clearly worried about how that's going to impact them, right? And in the traditional world, it's been the charging and, you know, what they charge you for peak hours and demand rates, but that's where we've really focused on a lot of our effort. That's why we have conversations with different utilities, whether they're in Tennessee or in Texas or whatever, because we think we add value in that space in terms of grid power management or off-grid power management capabilities that are critical.
I think that, you know, we've chatted about this. I think your approach to that, where you're pulling a load draw off the grid, storing it on site, and redistributing it through DC Fast, it has other applications. And one of the things that excited us when we were first talking is there's certain markets where natural disasters are prominent. And convenience stores are typically the first ones back up and running. They've got the emergency services for fuel, they've got inside stuff, they got ice, they got water. They're there for the first responders. And a lot of those communities are starting to necessitate and require at least a switch to connect a generator or an on-site generator. There is a scenario where technology like what you guys are deploying could be built up in a parallel and provide auxiliary power to that store in the case of an emergency situation, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the way we've looked at it. I mean, we look at EV charging as something that we do, at least in terms of the start, but we actually don't look at it as where this company is going or where we should be taking this technology. One is, as you've said, grid down conditions. How do I get something back up and running in critical areas? So as you've noted, you know, gas stations and C-stores tend to be in areas where if the power goes down, people are trying to get out of those areas most likely. Right. And how do you keep those services up? That's one, but also from a utility side and working with those utilities, they have demand response issues. in power grids. They have spike issues. They have peak shaving. They have all these other things that they're trying to deal with in terms of brownout conditions and such, that if you think about it, you have this capability sitting off the side in these different locations supporting EV charging, which in part puts a burden on their network, but at the same time gives them something back in terms of helping to optimize the grid usage. We actually think that's part of where the give and take is going to be in this space, and what, you know, a company, you know, what some companies should be trying to do. Not to mention the fact that, as you've said, we don't draw a lot of energy from the grid at a given time. Mm-hmm. We draw 20, 27 kilowatts, maybe, you know, oftentimes less than that. That's very predictable. So if you've got those conditions with DC fast chargers across the grid, all of a sudden, you know what you can anticipate is going to happen. And the utility can do that to reward whoever has it on site, but also they can plan around it, because it's not like they're going to see 20 kilowatts over here and then 150 kilowatts next, you know, in 2 minutes from now. So, right. You know, and that's a little bit easier for them to plan too.
Your focus on grid availability and reliability is so important. You know, we hear a lot of retailers go, well, my utility won't let me do this. And my response to is, have you called them? Have you spoken with them? There's got to be a cooperative relationship between the utilities and the retail infrastructure, whether it's doing a system the way yours, which puts lower pressure on the grid, or do a more traditional system, which puts more heavier pressure on the grid. That collaboration between the two entities has to be successful. Otherwise, the whole market falls apart.
Yeah, I don't see how you manage to grow this kind of capability without taking that into consideration. I think it's probably different than the way it's been in the past, where I go buy fuel, I put it at my gas station, I sell it. You know, but that's not what this environment's about moving forward. You know, and whether you want to be green or you just want to be business cautious, it's still the same challenge. So finding a way to be able to support that moving forward, I think is beneficial on both sides of the equation. I also think that retailers probably get to benefit from it in general. I mean, if you've got the ability to run your own backup power in emergency situations, and at certain times be able to help the grid stay up and running in a region, that no doubt is of value to the utility. And therefore, from a business person's perspective, there's got to be value in there if I'm running a site or a business.
And then my last point is this: aesthetics means something. Convenience stores pride themselves on being bright, open, inviting, especially at night. Your unit is slick. It is a sexy looking machine, especially at night. The green lights are very, very cool. And you got to think about, if I'm envisioning my design and my store, and I got all this money spent on my facade, on my dispensers and my canopies and my store, and I'm going to put something in there, it better complement it pretty nicely. I think you've done a great job of the design elements for your units.
Thank you. I think our Kitty and the team would be very, very happy to hear that. I mean, they've cared a lot about the look, and we've cared about it. I mean, I agree with you. I think one of the focuses when we developed this particular product was, we've got an LED screen on it. How can that be of value to whoever's, you know, the site host is, and specifically thinking about retail, obviously the transaction methods, but the brand advertising, the fact that you can actually brand the front of the unit. You've got some interesting lights. It's not as big as I thought it was going to be when I saw it in the lab. I mean, you have a certain vision when you see something every day, and then you see it on the field and go, that's actually not that big. And actually it looks pretty good there. But yeah, it has some nice flashing lights. It shows you status. It has some little things that are, you know, it's not just walking up to some little pool, I guess.
You gotta have some bling, LeRoy. You gotta have some bling.
Yeah. So we're excited.
Thank you very much
about that. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your perspectives. I really appreciate it. And we'll stay in touch, and definitely good luck to you. And I look forward to once we're able to travel, getting out and seeing some of your sites.
Yeah, we're going to get one near to you, so you don't have to worry about it.
That'd be wonderful. Because I really don't want to get back on a plane. I'm loving this no travel thing. So
you won't have to wait too long. There'll be something pretty close to you pretty quickly.
Outstanding. Thanks a lot, really. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, John. You take care.
See ya.